Welcome to Glass in Session. I'm your host, Val. Thank you for joining me for the last episode of the season. Alas, our sojourn through Eastern Europe brings us to Moldova. Not to be confused with the Romanian region of Moldavia, Romania's neighbor to the east, Moldova, is a small country that is bordered to the north, east, and south by Ukraine. We're going to start with some winemaking history, then we'll move into the regions and the grapes and the wines, and then we'll bring it all home. So let's start with the history. As for the archaeological piece of Moldova's wine history, we have found fossils dating back tens of millions of years from several different species of grape leaves. Is that evidence of winemaking, however? Nope. What about evidence of grapevine domestication dating back to about the same time as the early chicken domestication I talked about in the Bulgaria episode, around 6 or 5,000 BC? Is that evidence of winemaking? No. How about this? Greeks were showing up in the area, and we know that more often than not, where there were Greeks, there were wines. They brought with them some good wine grapes and varieties to get that wine history party started in this area. Moldova does have a common historical arc with Romania, as it used to be part of the Moldavia region. So this means that the Ghetto Dacians that I talked about in the Romanian wine episode, they were making and drinking wine. And we know that when the Romans under Emperor Trajan took over in the 2nd century, the region was called Dacia or Dacia Felix. Remember, I talked about Happy Dacia, sounds like a sitcom. So we know from studying other wine regions that where there were Romans, there was wine. And there you go. Finally, we do know that along came Christianity in the Middle Ages, during which time the grape growing and winemaking fell to the churches and monasteries, who we can thank for keeping the wine business alive, believe it or not, during these times. And like other countries in this region, wine was becoming popular, not only culturally, but it was a big player in the agriculture, economic, and trade sectors. It was also a major export product, particularly to the Polish and Russian markets. We also surmise that there was some cross-pollination of grape varieties during this time because of the trade. And as wines and people and other goods crisscrossed this strategically located country, there was also some trading of kids. I kid you not. And not in the way you're thinking, but in the way that in 1483, Stephen the Great was like, Hey, Ivan the Third of Russia, hey, pal, how about your son, Ivan the Young, see? Marry my daughter, Elena Stefanova Volosanka, see? And we all stand together against those pesky Ottomans, you know what I'm saying? Well, Moldovan wine at this time was pretty popular, and this alliance between the Moldovan Principality and Russia seemed like a good deal, until it wasn't. Up until the late 1500s, Russia was depending on Moldova as its main supplier of its hooch. Yet, because of the Ottomans, they still impacted Moldovan winemaking, and this is why we can't have nice things, as I say in just about every episode where there's conquering and there's the decimation of the wine business. Winemaking, therefore, was banned by these jive turkeys. Get it? Jive turkeys, Ottomans, sorry. Thus, setting winemaking back for nearly 300 years during their occupation, and in some cases, banning winemaking. And this would be at least until 1812. That's when the Bucharest Peace Treaty was signed. After that, along came the colonizers because of an incentive program. It probably went a little something like this. Hey, colonizers, you come here. We'll give your fam a sweet, sweet 65 hectares of land. How about a tax break? And some other goodies. Sound like a deal? Well, apparently it did sound like a deal to the Germans, the Swiss, the French, the Bulgarians, and other settlers because after about 50 years, they owned nearly 12% of the vineyards in the Basarabia region, which today is mostly in Moldova, but partly in Ukraine. Now, it was here in Basarabia, the name for it back then, that a fruit-growing school, that's what I said, a fruit-growing school was founded in 1842, and by the early 1890s, it morphed into a school of winemaking and grape growing and all that good stuff. But then along came the powdery mildew in the late 1800s, followed by phylloxera, thus cutting the vineyards, at least in the Basarabia region, by nearly half by the early 20th century. Another common historical series of events that plagued other countries in this region, we do know that after a period of growth following phylloxera recovery, well, there was World War I, and there was the Russian Revolution. Again, this is why we can't have nice things. However, this is when we saw the Democratic Republic of Moldova form. Yada, 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 Nazis, World War II, can't have more nice things. But afterwards, vineyard growth would be back on the expansion train, making way for European varieties and the rise of hybrids. Sounds like a movie trailer that starts with "in a world" and ends with "the rise of the hybrids." However, in the mid-1980s, the USSR was mid-anti-alcohol campaign once again. The commies destroyed more vineyards between 1985 and 1987, about 30% during this time. Then in World War II, according to wineofmoldova.com, the areas they say were hit the hardest were Georgia, Moldova, and southern Russia. After the USSR finally imploded on itself, Moldova became one of the first post-Soviet countries to become a member of the International Organization of Vine and Wine, otherwise known as the OIV. It is a great resource if you're into world wine production, consumption, market figures, the whole thing, and some great historical photos. It's a resource I turn to often in this show, and they're also a great social media follow for you fellow cork dorks out there. They are on Blue Sky, and I believe they are on Threads as well. The first Moldovan wine laws came about in 1994, and by 2006, it was one of the top 10 wine exporters worldwide. By the mid-20-teens, about the time I started podcasting, the Wine of Moldova national brand, along with the creation of a national promoting body that oversees quality, production standards, the whole thing, it's like a consortium. They were called the National Office of Vine and Wine in English. Otherwise, it's the ONVV. And with this also came along their PGI system, again, based on EU standards. Today, in 2024, there are about over 147,000 hectares or so of vineyards, over 200 wineries. They produce about 1.4 million hectoliters of wine annually. I believe that was a 2022 figure, and export about 85% of the wine they produce to at least 63 countries. As of 2023, they were 20th in terms of the world's largest producers. How about that? Now let's get to the regions. I mentioned the 4 PGIs of Moldova. The first one is called the Valul lui Traian. In the south, it creates local specialties, meaning very intense, full-bodied and structured red that this region is known for, mostly from over 43,000 hectares of vines, 3 subregions, over 7 administrative districts. But here, 60% of the vines are going to be red or black grapes, mainly Cabernet, Merlot. Of the 40% of the vines that are white grapes, Sauvignon Blanc and Chardonnay pretty much rule the roost here. Sparkling wines are also made here, in addition to still wines as well as spirits. Then in the southwest, we have Stefan Voda. This is known for red wines, with about 57% of the vineyards being red grapes. We still have the Cabernet and the Merlot here, but we also have some Malbec and the Rara Neagra. This is the Romanian Babiasca Neagra that I mentioned a couple episodes back. Finally, in the middle of the country, we have Coldru, and this region is known more for the white wines, with the white grape varieties accounting for 63% of the vines. Chardonnay is going to be the top grape grown here, but other major whites include Sauvignon Blanc, Aligoté, the Burgundian specialty, Riesling, and Muscat Haut-Tonnelle. Again, red grapes are going to be mostly Cabernet and Merlot, but sparkling wines are made here as well as dessert-style liqueur wines. Now there's a PGI that covers the entire country. This is called Divine, and it's also a spirits PGI. So it's for grape spirits, so there are grapes grown here, but the Spirit Divine is going to be aged for a minimum of 3 years in oak, so it's kind of going to be like a brandy. 3 years for, I should say, VS or very special grade of Divine. If it's aged for 5 or more years in oak, it's going to be called VSOP or very super old pale. 7 years in wood is going to be XO or extra old, and then finally 20 years for extra old Divine. How cool is that? If you got yourself a bottle of that, I would love to hear about it. But let's go ahead and move on to the grape gab since we mentioned some of the grapes, because in addition to the international varieties making up many of the wines, and some grape varieties you're going to recognize from Romania, such as the Fetiasca Alba, Fetiasca Regala, Fetiasca Neagra, also the aforementioned Rara Neagra, there are some Moldovan originals on the rise, such as a Legenda. This is going to be a red grape from the National Institute of Winemaking and Viticulture in the Republic of Moldova, and it was created in 1975. This grape is a cross between the Austrian Traminer and an English table grape. Now, if we take the aforementioned Rara Neagra and cross it with the Cabernet, what do we get? Well, sometime between 1955 and 1975, Moldova did just that. And they came up with something called the Kodrinski, Codrinski. I'm going to go with that. Forvo didn't have it. It's a cross that makes some really deep, full-bodied wines with dark fruit and violet notes. And apparently it does well when aged in oak. And that's about all I could find on that one. Now for the whites. We have the white Viorica grape that was created in the late 1960s from the Aleatico, which ironically is a red grape, but it is of the Muscat family, and the French hybrid called Seagull 13-666. Wines from this grape are going to be aromatic in flora, so hello to that Muscat heritage of the Aleatico, and it's also going to be loaded with fruit and herbs. And then finally, another white Moldovan original that showed up only in this millennia is the Riton, R-I-T-O-N, born of the Viard Blanc and Riesling. Enough said. I expect wines to have a lot of the aromatic properties of Riesling, so to speak. Well, almost enough said. Here's the thing. We cannot end this episode as fast as I went on it on Moldovan wine without a little pit stop at Milești Mici. This is the world's largest collection of wine on the planet, at least according to the Guinness Book of World Records, built nearly 50 years ago in 1969. Thought it was going to be older, didn't you? Well, it has about 2 million bottles. Most of them are going to be red. From what I read, I believe on their website, about 70% of the stash is going to be red. 20% white wines and dessert wines are bringing up the rear at 10% of the collection. And some of these wines are supposed to be very exquisite. There are over 200 kilometers of tunnels carved into the limestone underneath this thing where a lot of the wine is stored. So you might be thinking to yourself, can I visit it? Yes, you can. Can I taste wine there? Of course you can. Can I buy wine there? Yes, and yes. I attached the super cool website in the show notes, and I do think it looks super cool. It looks beautiful. They have tours. Kids, I think, get in for free if they're under 10. So they even have tours of the cellars via your choice of bike, car, and they have these cute little electric trains because why the hell not? And tell me, you did not just mentally add this to your wine bucket list if you haven't been there already. And in the meantime, I will tell you that I will see you again next year. I thank you for bearing with me this season as I was simultaneously voicing 3 audiobooks throughout the last 3 months. And I know some of you won't believe this. I'm a little talked out. Or am I? Well, I'm going to take a month off. So either way, I hope you are celebrating the fall and winter holidays, however you so freaking choose. And I hope they are wonderful for you. And I hope I see you back in January. In the meantime, you can always reach out to me via email, val@glassandSession, or on the socials, pick your poison. Threads, Vino with Val, same as Instagram. Blue Sky at glassandsession.bsky.social. Lots of new wine peeps before, some I've never met. So thank you for finding me and thank you for following. And I'm happy to follow everybody back that doesn't look fake, of course. I'm on Spoutable, Glass and Session. I'm Vino with Val on Pinterest and on Facebook /Glass and Session, or find me on LinkedIn, Valerie Caruso. And of course, I have to make a plug for my podcast, Smoker Doodles, at Nebelung_smoke_show on Instagram. There is Glass in Session and, of course, podcast swag in my TeePublic store, linked way at the bottom of the show notes and on my website and on Smokey's Instagram account. And this week, since I'm not trying to sell you wine gummies and fake fingernails, getting yourself some swag is a very small way to support the Winecast. For those of you that are scoring yourself some swag already, thank you so much for your support. I hope you're enjoying it. There are always sales on the site, especially like the Black Friday time of year, so keep a lookout for those too. Glass and Session is a production and registered trademark of Vino With Val, LLC. Music is Write Your Story by Joy Stock. Website is glassandsession.com/podcast.